Welcome back, everybody. I'm Tommy McCarthy. This is Let's Talk Cyber. I'm delighted to welcome back, no stranger to Let's Talk Cyber, Richard Preece, former British military officer, the founder of DA Resilience, and the chief training officer at OSP Cyber Academy. That is not all of the hats Richard wears these days, but Richard, welcome back to Let's Talk Cyber.
Hi, Tommy. It's good to be back.
It's been an interesting time for all of us globally, and none more so in the UK, and the uncertainty in the world geopolitically right now. And it's a great theme to lead with, Richard, leading in uncertainty, which is a very apt topic that you've chosen for us today. But what do you mean by leadership, Richard? And will we see the need for it as AI does more? Because AI right now is being pushed in every direction you can ever imagine. So leadership, is it really necessary?
Okay, so let's start with what we mean by leadership. And there are countless definitions and perspectives on leadership, but I'll give you a working definition that we can develop and expand as we talk. Ultimately, leadership is about personal power, your ability, just plain you, of how you win the hearts, the emotions of people, and the minds, the rational brains of others in order to achieve a common purpose. It's as simple but as complex as that at the same time.
Yeah.
And why it's necessary is any organization, especially those people who work in cybersecurity and resilience, are having to deal with frictions, with confusion, and other challenges that get in the way of actually achieving that common purpose. And despite AI coming in, AI won't take that away anytime soon. In fact, in many ways, AI will amplify and create new risks, more frictions, more confusion as we get over the hump of actually getting round and understanding what it is. So it's really important that leadership is acknowledged as being crucial to every organization, and in the cybersecurity and resilience world, even more so, because the challenges are just rising by the day.
Why are we currently in uncertain times, and what does it mean exactly, Richard? Can you expand on your explanation?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why we're hitting uncertainty on a global scale is there are a conflation of factors that are all coming together, reflecting that we lead a deeply interconnected and interdependent world. And technology has been central to that, but isn't the only thing. So we have a whole geopolitical creative destruction taking place. The old world order is breaking down. The new world order hasn't yet been created, and what that looks like, we still don't know. But we are going through that change. The same is happening in the technology space. AI, quantum just over the horizon, many other technologies are all combining together to create enormous opportunities. But also, in doing so, they're creating and amplifying risks that are already there. So the uncertainty is growing and growing at an exponential rate, but our brains are only used to working in a much more linear thing. And so our capacity to absorb what's taking place, both individually but collectively, is struggling to do that. And that's why leadership is going to be central to enable us to navigate very uncertain times. How things will develop is still unclear, and there are multiple potential scenarios of what that can look like, all of which are plausible in their own way, some more likely than others.
Yeah, Richard, and that's a great explanation. So I guess, when everything feels uncertain, Richard, what does leadership and strategy actually mean in practice? Because it's all right explaining the reasons behind uncertainty. So what does leadership and strategy actually mean in practice? I guess that's the most important thing, because it takes us back to leadership yet again.
Yeah, and this is where I think leadership needs to evolve. And the first thing is being really clear that actually the one thing we need to be clear about is our ability to adapt. And that's individually and collectively within your organizations as we move forward. So if we organize ourselves and recognize that strategically we need to be able to adapt, leadership is about how we adapt, how we innovate, because ultimately this is an innovation challenge. And that's going to require adaptation and change at the individual level, everyone's beliefs, biases, experiences are being challenged, and the underpinning assumptions we work by. It also is culturally our social consensus, our culture within our firms, our culture at a wider level is all being challenged. The consensus view is altering. And so we need to recognize that and recognize the challenges and the uncertainty that creates. But ultimately, the physical world, including cyberspace, is changing. We are seeing with AI enormous data centers. That is a physical reality, not just a cyberspace reality, that is developing. That is changing where trade routes need to be, where power is effectively residing. There are enormous opportunities, but there are enormous challenges associated with that. So leadership is about managing that change. It's about cohering people, bringing them together so that you can genuinely evolve. Yeah, so I think this is being much more about, in the first instance, acknowledging your own limitations of knowledge and ability and experience. No one has done this before. So we've got to be curious, we've got to be humble, and we've got to, as leaders, create the conditions that both develop our people and empower them so we can gather that collective genius. And that means creating collaboration. Now, that's collaboration not just within your own specific areas of responsibility, but cross your organization and beyond the wider organization. There is no monopoly of ideas. So it's about asking the right questions and providing the right challenge and being prepared to be challenged. You know, recruiting people and encouraging people to challenge you, because we all have biases, and having that ability to create the conditions of collaboration where there is a genuine marketplace of ideas, where there is a genuine abrasion, but that is not in a bad sense. It's where people make their case and it is managed and we discover what works, what doesn't, in a much more effective way. So that means not having a single project that says we're going to deliver this at this time and everything's going to be great. It's much more about creating the conditions where you can try, you can learn from that trying, you can adjust and try again and capture that feedback as we go through. And that is not traditionally the way a lot of organizations are structured. It's not their cultures, and it's not necessarily the way people are used to leading. But it's the way that is probably going to be the most successful. Now, in software, agile software development, has been with us since 2001 when the original Agile Manifesto was done. That can be developed and delivered across all organizations. I was with a fintech last week. We were going through some severe but plausible scenarios that were challenging to people. And it wasn't a case of people haven't done their jobs. It was there were multiple perspectives. And by capturing those, we were then able to make integrated decisions.
Yeah.
And so the final part of the leadership element and the framework we need to do is to be able to resolve challenges, problems, disagreements, and produce prioritized actions that are worth pursuing and are achievable.
Yeah.
And it's not a case of A is right, B is wrong. We need elements of A, elements of B, and probably elements of C as well to take forward. And that is a slightly different form of leadership than many people perhaps expect or are used to doing. But it's the way to manage uncertainty.
And I guess, Richard, that's the challenge that leaders have right now, because there is so much noise right now in relation to the different approaches to leadership. How on earth do leaders cut through the noise and deluge of data right now? How on earth do these leaders know what is good and what is bad? I mean, is there a specific formula that you could suggest, or is it a case of trial and error? What are your thoughts about how they can cut through the noise and deluge of data right now, Richard?
Yeah, so this is partly the way you organize yourself, you structure things and develop processes, and they probably need to be designed around how do you anticipate what's going on. So How do you generate foresight to anticipate things? But also, how do you gain insight into what's taking place today? And how do you develop lessons that you could, from hindsight, so that you can constantly adapt? And then how do you provide a governance structure over that? Part of that is about developing different scenarios and challenging yourself to see how those scenarios would take you into something that would be beyond your tolerance of change. Now, that might be a negative, but it also could be how you would actually accumulate positive gains in those scenarios. And frequently, it's not an either or, it's both. And that's where the judgment comes in. So can you absorb the change? Have you got the capacity as well as the capability to absorb change and adapt? And what do you need to prioritize and invest in? And then ultimately, how do you adapt? And that means adapting people at the individual level, developing them, empowering them, but also supporting them. This is challenging individually, and people can become overwhelmed with the pace of change because everything is changing at the same time. And that is where leadership can then show commitment to the change, model the behaviors that we've just described, and make sure you bring in your team, your employees, and get them involved, but also other stakeholders if need be. It's about developing rewards, not necessarily financial rewards, but more social rewards that show why people are valued by contributing, by innovating. And that needs to be backed up by wider HR systems. So it's about crossing from perhaps the narrow cyber world and working closely with HR and other key functions within your organizations. And ultimately, it's about developing a competing narrative, a story that is positive, but recognizes the reality of the uncertainty. And decisions may be made. The reasoning for those decisions need to be clear, but also be open to be challenged and adjusted as we learn and discover more as we go through.
Yeah, well, there's no question, Richard, that, leading in uncertainty has become more of an understanding to me now than ever before, because the leaders of today have really got to blend their capabilities with their teams to become more dynamic. And there's no question from my point of view that leadership isn't what it used to be. A leader was the guy that made all the decisions at the top of the tree and, disseminated his decisions down further below him. But I think right now, good leadership is about pulling people together, collectively bringing in the strengths that the team has got to offer, and then obviously acting upon the decisions that you make collectively to get the best for your organization. That's my own simple interpretation of what you've said in the podcast for 15 minutes, Richard. Yet again, we've almost run out of time. Give me one key takeaway, Richard, about leading in uncertainty. Please make it short, but make it dynamic. What is the one takeaway you'd like our listeners to think about today?
Be curious, be humble, and engage with people, but be ready to make a decision.
There we go. You heard it here first. Richard Preece, Managing Director of DA Resilience, Chief Training Officer, I should say, of OSP Cyber Academy. Thanks again, Richard, for joining me on Let's Talk Cyber. Thanks very much,
Pleasure.
Richard.